All right. Welcome to Billing Essentials webinar. I'm Randy, and I've been with Workamajig. It'll be 10 years in January. The billing webinar, I'm going to kind of just cover some general information about billing in Workamajig, and then we'll kind of address the three types of billing. So generally speaking, Workamajig has the hub being the project. And so when you're loading up your schedule in the project with your task assignments where you're assigning a person to perform a specific service, that service that they're performing has an hourly rate by default in the back end of the system. And I'll be showing you that in just a moment. And so when your staff is entering their timesheets on a daily basis and people are either approving them themselves or sending them to somebody else and they're approving them in a timely manner, those approved transactions on those timesheets could become billable. And only approved transactions are billable. So you want to kind of make sure that your staff and the rest of your team are making sure that transactions that should be billed are approved so they can be billed. And I'm going to show you something on the Today Accounting page that can kind of help with some of that. So I'm going to jump over the Accounting Today page. And right at the top, it says items needing attention, unapproved transactions. This won't be timesheets, but we can ignore client invoices because we're not paying client invoices. And I'm going to hide the payments, but this is where you have some vendor invoices in this database that have yet to be approved. And so these would not be billable until they were approved. I just wanted to point out that on your Today Accounting page, you do have the ability to look up those unapproved transactions. Now we'll just go right back to our Today Billing page. And as you can see here, under this To Bill As of Today's Date, this is our mass billing tool, and it shows the three types of billing that we have: time and materials, fixed fee, and retainer. I'm going to discuss retainer first and then circle back and do time and materials and fixed fee. Retainer is the simplest setup in Workamajig and is the easiest thing to bill. So we recommend that you knock your retainers out first and then move on to time and materials and fixed fee. I've created several projects with approved transactions to bill, but one of those projects, I'm switching now to the Project Manager Projects page. I just type in boot. I will have the project that I created for today's webinar. Time and materials, fixed fee, and retainer. And this retainer project, that's the way I'm doing retainers first, under the project settings of that project, you can see under billing options that currently the billing method is time and materials. And the reason for that is if I chose retainer, the required field for retainer. So this client would need to have a retainer set up in order to link to that required field. And currently there isn't one. So that's why it's showing time and materials for the moment. But if we go back to our Today Billing page, down here in the Views section, I have retainers to see if there's any existing retainers in the system. And I also have that option under the Global Search Views tool under Billing. I could also see a list of my retainers here as well without having to navigate to the Today Billing page. So I know that we don't have a retainer for this client yet, so I'm going to hit the plus button here, come down and create a new retainer for my client and link that to the project in just a moment. But again, as a reminder, you do not have to navigate to the Today Billing. You have the new button on your toolbar. You could scroll down to Billing and create your new retainer from here as well. But just to make sure that I have the correct client ID, I'm going to back to my projects. Try capture that client ID. When I create my new retainer for the correct client. So new retainer. GL company is required in this database. I'll just pick whatever the first one option is. Client is required, so I'm going to paste in my client ID, and there's my client. I'll just put in test retainer for November 22 webinar. This describes the retainer. And you have a start date. If I didn't think this was going to start until December 1st or January 1st, I could update that and have the start date start in next month or in January if I chose to. Notice that it is a required field as well. What's the frequency of this retainer? Defaults to monthly, but we have several options now. We've got weekly, monthly, quarterly, twice a year, and yearly. I'm just going to leave it on monthly. And number of periods is required. We'll just make this an annual contract for 12 months. How much are we going to bill them each month? $5,000. So this amount per period for 12 periods, total $60,000 for the year. This isn't going to care about whether or not you've worked on 1 project, 0 projects, 1,000 projects, did 1 hour of work, 0 hours of work, or 1,000 hours of work. You're setting up a contract that, regardless of the transactions, you're going to bill $5,000 a month. I will make myself the approver of any of these invoices. Frank is the person I'm logged in as here. And these 2 boxes right here include labor and include expenses. If I did that and hit save and did nothing else, we would only be billing $5,000 a month. But I'll show you how you can exclude some labor and exclude some expenses if you choose to in the next screen. And if I want to do that, how do I want to handle those extras? If I check this box, I want to invoice those extras separately on a different invoice, or don't check that box and include those extras below the $5,000. You would see the additional labor or expenses that's not included in that $5,000. And for the extra line format, you just want one total line across all your projects for those extras, or do you want 1 line per project? So I'm just going to leave it as 1 line here and not invoice the extras separately. So mentioning again, include labor and include expenses. As soon as I hit save, I'll be able to explain this a little better. Here's our included services, the labor, and here's our included items, the expenses. So if I look at my included services, there's 85 of them in there right now. And just as an example, if AP Finance, AP Processing was something that I wanted to bill for in addition to the $5,000 a month, then I would remove that from this list by hitting that trash can there, and then I would see this change from 85 to 84. Same idea on the expenses side, included items. If I wanted to include all of the expenses except for airfare, then I would just remove airfare and bill for airfare separately. But on our setup, it would still be on the same invoice, not invoicing it on a separate one. So that's what the included services and included items means, but you still have the ability to exclude some of those and bill those separately. See, somebody has a Q&A. So the question is, when would you use a retainer versus a billing schedule? A billing schedule is used when you are setting up when you want that particular project with the billing schedule to hit your mass billing tool. And so it has nothing to do with a retainer. The retainer is an actual contract that you're setting up with your client that says every week, month, year, whatever, I'm going to be billing you this amount and you're expected to pay, regardless of the work that got done or didn't get done. Billing schedule is just a typical schedule that's going to feed into this to bill as of date. And if your billing schedule has those transactions or the billing schedule set up before or today or before November 22nd, that will hit when you search for your projects using the mass billing tool. Hope that answers your question. All right, so we have our retainer set up with the contracted amount of $5,000 a month. Obviously, there's no projects here yet because we haven't linked any, and obviously there's no invoices because we haven't generated any invoices. So this will change in just a moment. So I'm going to come out of my retainer here, and now if I refresh my browser, that $1,000 in the retainer should change to 6, and it did. So now I have my retainer in there for 5,000 that I just set up, and so this is the mass billing method for retainers. There isn't anything to really review, it's just a contracted amount, and so I'm just going to check that and generate the invoice. Invoice date, posting date, these can be modified, but they're going to default to today's date. 1 invoice per retainer is what I'm going with, and if I want to save myself a mouse click, I can actually create this as approved and generate the invoice. So now I have an invoice for $5,000. Notice that it's no longer showing in here because we just billed it and it's no longer available to be billed. And if I refresh my browser again, this would happen within 3 minutes on its own, but just to show you the change here. Now that won't be 6,000 again until next month when that is ready to, retainer is ready to be billed again. So if I want to look for my retainers again, all retainers and my client, here is our retainer and here is the invoice. And if I want to link my project to that retainer, now I have the ability to go in back to those billing options and switch this to retainer. And now I actually have one that I can link this to. So now this project is linked to that retainer. So all those transactions that are on this project will just be part of that $5,000. So that is how easily you can get your retainer set up for your client. And then if you're creating projects that you want to give more direction to your staff for whatever they're working on for that client's retainer, then you would go in and link that project to the retainer you created. All right, so before we jump into time and materials and fixed fee, I'm going to generate one more invoice and then show you the back-end setup for billing and the client setup for billing, and then we'll actually go into bill some time and materials and fixed fee projects. So going to the plus button here, I want to actually create an advance bill. So this would be a deposit invoice that I want to send to my client ahead of any of the work that gets done. This is not related to the retainer. So this is my time and materials and fixed fee projects. So if I come in, hit the plus button here, or again, I could hit the plus button on the toolbar and scroll down to billing and get the same invoice option here to create a new invoice. I could link it to a specific project if I choose to. I'm just going to link mine to my client. You'll have that there, yep. And it's going to be $30,000. And this is an advance billing. So this is the box that I'm checking to say this is an advance bill, not a revenue recognition bill. So this advance bill is actually going to create a temporary liability for $30,000 on your balance sheet. And as we generate revenue recognition invoices, we'll start chewing into that $30,000 and relieving that. So I'm going to leave that at $30,000. I have in this system a required GL company, and you can see that the AR account is required, and this is either going to come from the client record or the default in the back end for your GL setup. So now that I have a advance bill in the system, I can approve it, get an approval comment, and if I post it, you'll see that account come into play. So accounts receivable, $30,000, then here's that advance bill temporary liability account 2110 that's getting credited with that $30,000. I'm going to leave that in the background as my advance bill. We should now have 2 invoices. And here's Here's our $5,000 retainer and our $30,000 advance bill. And you can see under the advance bill column, this one says yes. All right, so we have an advance bill that we sent to our client. We can use it even before they send us a check for the $30,000. I'm going to, before I jump into the back end setup, I see there is another hand raised. Yes, the question is, with the advance bill on the client level, can you apply to a specific job against that budget? Yes, when you create whether it's a time and materials or a fixed fee project, you have the ability to generate your invoice for that project's transactions, and then I'll show you how you can actually apply that $30,000 to cover that invoice. All right, so back end setup before we jump into time and materials and fixed fee. I'm going to the admin manager, system setup. Under there we have billing options. Before I jump into the billing options up here at the top with billing items, I want to show you what's linking to that billing item, and that's the services that you're performing. So account management, if I spin that account management one open, you can see that it's linked to the billing item professional services and sales account. So that service is linked to the professional services. There's two of them in here, but test instance, so there's going to be some extra information in here. But you can see the services, professional services is the billing item that it's linked to. So these billing items are used as categories or roll-up fields for your invoices, where you can show project XYZ and then professional services on the invoice, and those professional services may be account management, graphic design, copywriting, editing, proofreading, whatever those services are, and your invoice would look that way with the professional services and then listed under it the specific services that you provided on that invoice. If you want to insert a row here, you can add a new billing item if you choose to, or if you want to rename any of these, you have the ability to edit those. So that's your billing items. Your billing groups. I don't have a great use case for this, but one that I use is a golf tournament. So let's say your company is sponsoring a golf tournament next year in 2023, and you want to get 18 of your clients to each sponsor a hole. So you would create 18 projects in your Workamajig, and each one of those would be for those clients that are sponsoring each hole. So you might create a billing group called 2023 Golf Tournament. Then on the billing group field of the project settings, billing options for those projects, you can link that billing group code there, and you can search on that when you're in your searching for your either electronic billing worksheets or your mass billing. You can use that billing group code to pull those together. Payment terms, due upon receipt, net 15, 30, and 45 are in there by default. When I first started about 10 years ago, we were coming out of the big recession, and people were inserting net 60 and net 90. With what seems to be happening across the globe, you may need to add those net 60 and net 90 back in again soon. Hopefully not. So that's your payment terms. Payment methods, you've got ACH and check. Write-off reasons, this is not for writing off a bad debt invoice. This is for writing off transactions at the project level. So by default, you have beyond scope, customer service, an internal mistake. If you wanted to insert a new row there for whatever write-off reason you want, in addition to those, you can do that, and that would allow you to run reports in the future to see all of the write-offs and what are the write-off reasons. You can go by write-off reason if you need to. Invoice templates, these are the invoice templates that are in the back end of the system. There's detailed and summary. Excuse me, I had to cough. Somebody added show client PO. One of the things that I typically do when I'm training my new clients is I'll come in and I'll add something called the practice layout in here. Save that. And you could add as many as you want, but that allows you to keep the detailed with the boxes that are checked on the detailed intact, and the same thing with the boxes that are not checked or not checked on the summary. And that way you can just play around with your practice one and make the changes that you want to make without interfering with the detailed in the summary. Those are your invoice templates. Invoice and estimate layouts. If this is not going to meet your needs, then you may need to use the more flexible, a little more hard to use invoice and estimate layout tool. And then there's several examples in here. Here's a multiple project detailed billing item and item, and you'll see that it looks totally different than those check boxes. But this is, this is WYSIWYG, so you can move these around where you want to and do more detailed layouts if you need to, if the standard invoice template's not meeting your needs. And then finally, your sales tax rates. So by default, these are the ones that are set up in the system. Insert row to add your own sales tax. All right, so that's the back end setup. I got a question. Can you add an office to the billing services? You know what you're saying? So in here, probably not using offices, but if we were, then you should see an office over here as well. So if it was turned on, then we have department, but we don't have office turned on, so it's not showing up here. But you should be able to do that. All right, going into my client record. I'll just grab it from here. Use my hot link to my client record. We're talking about billing or client details, not company details down here. And then so under client details, you have billing, and then you've got your billing defaults. So this is navigating to the specific client's defaults, because these may be different for different clients that you have. Here's the sales tax again. If this client was going to be taxable, I can pick sales tax here. If I wanted to specify a unique AR account, I could for this, or a unique sales account, but it's pulling in the default from the general ledger setup. If I know that there's a template that I always want to use, I'm going to pull out this layout, more flexible, harder to use one, and I'll just pull summary in as my invoice template that I'm going to use for the invoices I create for this particular client. Then what billing method do I want to use as my default? If I only did fixed fee and never did any time and materials for this client, then I would change the default to fixed fee. Otherwise, each time I create a new project, I'm going to have to change it to fixed fee. But if it's 50-50, then it doesn't really matter which of those two you have in there. Once I'm ready to start invoicing this client, how do I want to do that? Do I want one invoice per client, so one invoice, or I could switch to one invoice per project, and then if I have 10 projects, I'm going to send them 10 invoices. So in my workflow, I'm going to have one invoice goes out, but then I'm going to have one line per project, then billing item, and then item. So that was that example that I mentioned earlier about project XYZ, professional service, the billing item, and then account management, graphic design, copywriting, etc. underneath that as the way the invoice is going to look. At the very bottom, I got my default payment terms for this client. I could leave it at net 30 or change it to one of these other if I chose to. So I will save those changes that I just made. So that is the back end setup and the client setup for billing. Now, when we go back to our today billing page, we already knocked out our retainer billing, the nice easy one. And now we're going to bill time and materials and fixed fee. So I have the ability to use my mass billing tool. And if I was wanting to close out October, I would change this and say, I only want to see transactions through October 31st, but I'm going to leave it as today's date because that's where all my transactions are. So if I jump in right into the mass billing tool and I put in my client record again, here are my 2 time and materials projects that I created. And I could just, knock these out and generate those invoices and call it good, but I'm going to show you some other tools in the mass billing tool. But before I do that, in mass billing, I want to make sure that you can just bill that project directly from the project. So if it's one of those projects that just got completed and you want to bill it and you're not waiting for your month-end billing, you can jump directly to the project. So test project 1. And then I have the billing tab down here. And right now, looks like there's only 3 transactions, timesheets that I can bill. We got 2 hours, 1 hour, and 1 hour, because that's showing up in the unbilled default up here in the top left-hand corner. If I change that to unapproved, here's 2 timesheet transactions that Frank has that have yet to be approved. So you'd want to track Frank down and make sure that those got approved. Has anything already been billed on this project? Not yet. Has anything been marked as billed? I have a miscellaneous cost back on in October for photocopies that I marked as billed. If I want to make that billable now, I could check that box and I could make that billable. Anything that I have written off yet? Nope, nothing written off. If there was something written off, I could check it and make it billable again as well. Anything put on hold? There's a purchase order that's been put on hold. So I'm going to undo the hold. Now when I go back to my unbilled tab, we should see that purchase order. Has anything been transferred in this project? Nope, no transactions transferred. Has any adjustment been made to any transactions? So going back to the unbilled, now we have that purchase order that was on hold that we took off of hold, and now it's billable again. So we left the miscellaneous cost as marked as billed. So I have these 3 transactions and this order, and if I check that top box, this red information is because this is a purchase order and it's not linked to a vendor invoice yet, and I can pre-bill this, but it's not a true transaction until it's linked to a vendor invoice, which becomes the voucher. But it says 1 or more orders selected. Orders may not be marked as billed or written off. So that's why it's letting us know that we have that checked. So that's why it's showing up in those red letters, because you can't do that. Basically what I'm doing here is pre-billing the purchase order, and that will generate another temporary liability on your balance sheet for the 2120 pre-billed media and orders account, similar to the advance bill accrual account 2110 that I mentioned earlier. So now I am going to bill this purchase order, but there's 2 hours here, 1 and 1. I can drill into those 2 hours, and if I wanted to write off one of those hours or make an adjustment, I can't adjust the hours because you worked 2 hours on it. But if I wanted to change this rate to 150 or 75 an hour, I could do that. Or if I wanted to just change the gross to 300 or 200, it would make the change to the rate. And I have that ability, and that's what, when I clicked on that adjusted option under unbilled, if I had made this adjustment here, it would show up there. But I also have this split time entry option. So if I wanted to write off one of these hours and bill one of those hours, I can split that time entry. And it says must be less than 2 hours. So we'll split it, make it even. So 1 and 1. So now we'll have 4 1-hour transactions instead of 3 1 hour and 1 2 hour. So now I'm going to write off this calculating. Now I should see 1 in the write-off section. And so this is that one that we just wrote off. And if I wanted to undo the write-off, I could. But we'll just leave it there, and I'll switch back to unbilled. and I'll bill these 3 hours, and I'm going to pre-bill my purchase order. This, I could transfer these and or put them on hold, but I also can bill them. So billing, one per billing item and item, it's pulling that from my billing defaults that I set up on my client record. And you can see it's 450. If I change this to 400 or 500, this is my last effort that I can change the amount to bill on the invoice. It would, since it is 450, if it was 400 or 500, it would take the difference, the 10% or whatever that is, and adjust the transactions accordingly based on the difference between 400 and 450 or 450 and 500. So I am going to create the invoice using the default 450 amount. So this should give us an invoice. And there it is. It isn't approved yet, so I know I need my approval comment. So approval comment. So it is now approved. And if I post it, it's just a regular AR invoice. So it's hitting accounts receivable for 450, and then each of the lines: gross revenue for production, gross revenue billed service fees, and then the pre-bill accruals for that 2120 account that I was talking about. So this is the posting of this, but if I close that out and unpost it, over here on the right-hand side and under the summary, I see that it's 450 less applied advance billings of 0 right now, but I have $30,000 of unapplied advances. So I'm going to use up some of that deposit to cover this invoice. So as soon as I click that link, it shows me my advance bill that we created earlier in the session. I'm going to apply it. Now I've linked my advance bill to cover that 450, and now there's a 0 amount open. So this is up to you on whether or not you want to send this to your client to show them that you're using up your deposit, or you can just use it internally and not send it to your client. If I post it now that I've applied that advanced billing, the posting is going to be a little bit different. And you can see that the advance bill accrual is now being debited. So that temporary liability is shrunk by 450. That is me generating a time and materials invoice from the project. And then once that invoice was generated, I approved it. And then before I posted it, I was able to apply that advanced billing. I wouldn't be able to do that if I posted it first. Now it's posted with that advanced bill on it, relieving that 450 from that $30,000 liability. So that is going to your project and billing that project from the project's billing tab instead of doing the same thing. Doing the same thing from your time and materials tool. So putting my client back in there. Now we only have one project left that has any transactions to bill because we took care of the other one at the project level. But this has the exact same tool set that the project does. So if I open this up, click on that to open it up, you can see that I've got 4 hours of labor and the purchase order to bill here as well. So this is, in essence, the same mechanism that you would use at the project level, but you're using the mass billing tool to come in, and then you can still split those time entries up and generate the same invoice using the mass billing tool. So I will bill my purchase order, and I'm going to bill all 4 of those hours. I'm not splitting it up, I'm not writing anything off. I'm just going to bill the 400 or the 575, and so now I can go ahead and bill from the mass billing tool, one per billing item and item. Total amount again is 575. If I change that, again, it would affect those transactions by the percentage difference here. Create another invoice, this project. And so again, it's not approved yet, so I am going to approve it. And now if I, again, post, it's not going to hit the advance bill receivable, but I can unpost it. And now, once again, I still have a $29,550 left, so I'm going to apply my advance bill again, using up another $575. And now if I post it, you'll see that relief coming to that temporary liability again. All right. So that is container billing, and then time and materials billing at the project level, and then time and materials billing using the mass billing tool. And so we'll do the same thing with fixed fee. So looking at your fixed fee, mass billing, again, I'll put my client in there to reduce the noise. So here's our two fixed fee projects. And very similarly to what we just did with time and materials, I'm going to come back to the mass billing, but just show you that if I wanted to bill a fixed fee project the same way that I billed that time and materials, I have that same option here. And I can go into my fixed fee project. Noticing that on the billing options, it is fixed fee. This one is called expenses not included because I checked the box expenses not included. The other one is expenses included where I left the box unchecked. So that's the setup for a fixed fee project versus time and materials. So if I go down to the billing tab here, it's going to look a little bit different. So that's defaulting to the fixed fee tab. I could treat this like a time and materials and bill the actuals from this as well. And you can see that slide out looks the same as that other one. But since we're billing fixed fee, I'm going to show you the options under here. Invoice by, it's defaulting to percentage of billing item. And so this is showing those billing items that are linked to the transaction services that are on this. But there's also just one amount. So right now, 100% to bill is a total of $62.52.50. And if I only wanted to bill 50%, I could just change that to 50. I'm billing 50% of the budget, which is $31.26.25. Or if I just wanted to round that to 3,000, just bill 3,000 right now, then that's 47, almost 48%. So I'm going to show you another option, and it's percentage of service and item. This is more like time and materials, but you get to control the percentage that you're billing. So right now we have our printing expense. Let's say we're going to bill 100% of our printing expense, but we only want to bill 50% of our labor at this time. So I'm going to come up here and change these to 50. Should be real close to 50% total, but it's going to be slightly different because we're billing 100% of the printing, so it's a little bit over 50%, but 31.63.75. So this is us taking control rather than just billing a one amount percentage of the total budget. I'm saying drilling into those services and items. Say I'm billing 50%. And these could all be different numbers, but I'm just saying in general, 50% of all of our labor and 100% of our expenses at this time. I'll create an invoice, revenue invoice. I could create another advance bill if I chose to by picking that option. So now we're creating our invoice for our fixed fee project. I'll approve it. Let's comment. And once again, post. Now we're posting that basically 50% of that total budget is what's getting hit. And I can unpost it. And I can now that it's unposted, I can reduce that temporary liability again by a little more than $3,000 again. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm now applying that advance to my third invoice. And once again, just showing that relief of that temporary liability going down by 3,000 more. All right, so that is fixed fee billing from the project itself. Same opportunity using the Today Billing mass billing tool for fixed fee. Generate again. Line in there. And because we still have some left of that budget, it's still showing in the mass billing tool that we could bill that other project that we just billed from the project itself. I'm going to address this one down here, the other fixed fee one. So this is now the one total amount, and is it going to be based on what's remaining to bill? That would be more like up here where we've already billed some. Here we're just saying from the total. It doesn't really matter at this point, but from the total we're going to bill 50%. So if I did that and generated the invoice, it would basically generate a bill for that 31.26.25. Or I can click edit details, and this will look familiar. So here's our fixed fee, and again I have those same options: one amount, percentage of task, and our percentage of service and item again. So I'll flip it this time. I'm going to bill 100% of our labor, only 50% of our expense. And so now it's almost 100% because we're billing 100% of almost everything that's on the project except for 50% of that printing expense. So it's just under 100%. So again, I'll create my invoice, revenue, approve it, give it a comment again. And I'm not going to show you the posting without, but we do still have 25,000 left. So let's use some of that up again. Apply our advance bill, and then show the relief. All right, so that is billing essentials. I am going to show you some of the reports that you have access to, most likely. Under Workamajig Everyone Report Center, there's some really useful financial reports. Your AR reports are in here as well, so you can run your AR aging. You have an invoice backup report that you can run, a sales journal, an invoice summary. And then under financial reports, if you want to see how profitable your client is, so you have client profit and loss detail view, and then client profit and loss multi-view, which shows you multiple clients lined up against each other. But if I wanted to go and run this client P&L single date range, this month to date, put my client back in there, and we'll see what this looks like. So this is now showing us our P&L for that particular client. That's useful reports in there in the back end of the system. Go ahead and go through those at your leisure, but I think those are useful. And the invoice backup report, that sometimes if you have super complex invoices that can't print out exactly as your client needs them, sometimes you just get as close as you can, and then you send an invoice backup with them in addition to. Next month, will the remaining 50% be listed to bill? Correct, yeah. As soon as you bill it, it used up that 50%, and the remaining 50% would be available to bill even before next month. But if your billing schedule said next month, then yes, that would be showing up in the mass billing tool 50%. All right. Hopefully this was informative and you guys learned something that will help you set up your clients and set up your back end in case you didn't catch all that your first go through, and then how to bill from the project and how to bill from the mass billing tool, whether it's fixed fee or time and materials, and setting up a retainer and linking that to a project and then billing that retainer on a schedule. Thank you for your participation. And if you have any questions that come up later, just send an email to support@workamajig.com and your account manager will get right back to you. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving. Bye.